Actually, children develop so much new learning in that first year that their brain will actually double in weight and triple by the time they're 3. And that is because of all the synaptic connections that occur in their brain between the brain cells, which are called neurons. So all the neurons are in place already when they're born, but there's very few connections between those cells.
Hi, I'm Crystal Luce, professor of education.
And I'm Aimee Ketchum, pediatric occupational therapist.
Welcome to Plant the Seed of Learning, the podcast where we merge education and medical models to bring you science-based, practical insights on all things early childhood.
Whether you're a parent, teacher, therapist, or a policymaker, we're here to help you support children from the start.
Today we have a very low-key episode. Aimee and I are going to share the book we wrote, The Early Childhood Promise. This is available on Amazon if you have an interest in it by the end of the podcast. We felt it was very relevant for the month of March because school districts are entering kindergarten screening time. And this leaves a lot of parents feeling uneasy and feeling like, did I prepare my child enough? And so we thought we would share some thoughts from our book pertaining to early childhood.
So it is kindergarten registration time at all your local elementary schools. And I always find this is when I get the most questions about, is my child ready? Is my child on track? Did we do everything we need to do to make sure they're going to be ready to start kindergarten? So there is so much that goes into this. As any parent knows, it does not start 6 months before the start of kindergarten. It is not a quick cram and prep between March and September, between that sign up and start day. Really, kindergarten readiness begins at birth. We are preparing children to be inquisitive. We're preparing children to have language acquisition and learn about their world and talk about the things they see, really from the day that they're born. And I know I've talked about this before on our podcast, but working in the NICU, I know that babies are learning about their world before they should even have been born. Because when I walk up to an incubator and open up the little door and lean down and talk to that baby, they open their eyes and turn their head looking for the source of that sound. So they are already
Mhm.
learning and exploring before they should even have been born. So babies are learning and showing curiosity as newborns. So we're going to go over some of the things we talk about in our book, The Early Childhood Promise. Today, we're just going to do a quick chapter by chapter overview. In our first chapter, we talk about just early child development. We really stress the fact that actually, children develop so much new learning in that first year that their brain will actually double in weight and triple by the time they're 3. And that is because of all the synaptic connections that occur in their brain between the brain cells, which are called neurons. So all the neurons are in place already when they're born, but there's very few connections between those cells. And when a baby is adequately stimulated by having rich visual things to look at, and you're talking to the baby and interacting with the baby, and they're feeling the movement on their body. Those brain cells occur, the connections between the brain cells occur at a rate of over 1 million per second. So that is so much activity happening in those little brains. So the more we can do to give them those sensory motor experiences, and by sensory motor, I just mean taking in information from all their senses, what they see, what they hear, taste, smell, movement on their bodies, touch on their bodies. Those are all the things that cause those brain cells to fire off and connect. So, in our first chapter, we talk about all of those things. We talk a lot about attachment theory, about the importance of bonding with a baby, making the baby feel like there's a trusted adult that cares for them, so that they feel safe and secure in their world. And that allows them the foundation to then go off and explore their world. If you've ever seen a baby sort of crawl away from mommy or daddy and then look back to make sure they're still there and feel that security, and then crawl a little further and explore, and then maybe they come back back to mom or dad like a touch point, make sure they're still there and feel safe, and then they'll go explore a little further. We talk about that concept a lot in our book, how we create that strong foundation of security and attachment. At the end of every chapter, we actually have some very pragmatic tips for parents, professionals, and the community, because it really takes a whole community of people working together to support parents and children. So we have tips for parents, tips for professionals, and tips for the community under our Where Do We Go From Here section. So, in our first chapter about basic early child development, we talk about um, some of the tips we have for parents. Simply talk, read, and sing to babies as much as you can. Narrate what you're doing, start reading books to babies, sing to babies, whether you like the sound of your voice or not, your baby will. Um, as far as professionals go, some tips we have are to ensure that your practice is always evidence-based, ensure that what you're doing is based in data, recent data, and we have that all for you in our book. And for some tips for the community, as often as you can, think about the parents in your community and how you can best support their parenting,
Mhm.
providing free programming, support, education. Maybe you put a hopscotch or books in your lobby or something that can give children something to do when they're in your facility that's going to continue to add to their learning.
I love
So
that.
that's just, yeah, so there's so many things.
So,
You probably have stuff to add, Crystal.
no, not really. I just have so when we're talking about the senses, I just, it made me think about the mobiles above the cribs and how important they are for babies,
Yes, yes,
placed adequately above so they're not dangerous. But babies love that visual stimulation.
yeah,
And then I was thinking how some parents get nervous about babies wanting to put everything in their mouth. But that is how they start to explore their world through
yeah,
taste and just how that feels on their tongue.
yeah.
So a lot of the toys that have the ridges and babies are like gnawing on them, it's not just because they're teething, it's because they're exploring.
Yes, because their mouths have so many nerve endings. So they're
Yeah.
stimulating a large part of their brain by bringing something to their mouth and seeing,
Yeah.
what does this feel like in my mouth? What does it taste like? So yeah, that's a great way that they're learning about their world. And I love that you bring up mobiles because vision is such an important
Mhm.
piece of early development. And I don't think we really, recognize that babies
Mhm.
actually are born with a very poor sense of vision. They can best see about 8 to 12 inches from their face, and they can really only see black and white and red when they're first born. But over the course of the first several years, that becomes more acute. But their vision is not fully developed until after the age of 5. So they're starting kindergarten with still not having full 20/20 vision. So there's still a lot we
Yeah.
can be doing to, help them develop their vision. And for babies, I love that you mentioned the mobiles because we want to keep it novel and unfamiliar because they get bored. So
Yeah.
thinking different, maybe you switch out the mobile from time to
Yeah.
time or move it from one side of the crib to the other side of the crib so that they're gazing up from different directions, so that their tiny muscles around their eyes are developing symmetrically too. So there's so much to think about when it comes to vision. But yeah, we cover all that in our book, in our
Sure.
first. In our second chapter, we go into the promise of early childhood education. So here
Mm.
we talk a lot about early education and child care. So any of our listeners who have a child in childcare have a very good understanding of just how expensive that can be and how challenging it can be to get your child into a quality childcare center, because it is a business model that is really, really challenging. And it's something that we cover in our book that a lot of other countries, frankly, are doing a much better job with subsidizing childcare for families so that it doesn't fall solely on the shoulders of the hardworking parents. According to care.com, the 2024 cost of care report, 65% of parents have spent time on waiting lists, with 43% of parents waiting for 4 months or longer. So you practically have to get your child on a waiting list before they're even born for most areas of the country. So 81% of parents report that they are simultaneously juggling multiple wait lists at once, hoping to find just one placement for their baby. And often you have to pay just to be on a waiting list. So
Yeah.
this is a significant challenge for parents. Um, the report also said that 64% of parents and 73% of single parents say they've been put on a waiting list for early childhood care, forcing many of them to spend more money on less than ideal situations while they wait for a spot to become available. So
Mhm.
it's such a challenge, and we really dive into this in our book. We go into the history of childcare. We go into all the economics of why it is so expensive and why childcare providers are so underpaid. So if you are thinking that this is something that you're dealing with, you're not alone. This chapter should be very validating for you that you're not alone and you did nothing wrong. You didn't wait too long or, overlook anything obvious. It is really, really hard and challenging. So we talk about, the importance of quality childcare, some tips and some ideas, on how to get that for your child at the end of our chapter where we have where do we go from here? Some tips that we have for parents are let your voices be heard. Reach out to your policymakers. Share your stories. Be honest and real because you're not alone out there. Definitely do your research. Look into the centers near you before your baby's even born. Unfortunately, it's something we need to think about. Um, so sometimes employers have like an employee assistance program. So definitely look into that if your employer offers that and you get some assistance where you work for childcare costs. For business owners, we just encourage business owners to please give your employees some grace when they have a sick child or they're having struggles with childcare because it is very, very challenging. We also encourage business owners to be a part of the solution. It's very rare that a business can offer on-site childcare or subsidized childcare, but perhaps they can get creative with their employees. They know they have good talent, and if they're struggling with getting to work or getting work done because of childcare, work with that employee to come up with some solutions perhaps. When it comes to community members, we ask you just to think about the early childhood in your town, in your community, how you can maybe help, maybe make a donation. Maybe you could donate money or goods or food to a local child care center that's struggling. Um, and there's a lot of potential for collaboration between schools and colleges and universities in childcare. And we cover a lot of that in our chapter as well. So, just some things when it comes to early childhood and childcare and that early education that we know needs to be so quality because it's really setting the foundation for their future learning and academic skills. So, we dedicate, a good chapter to that as well.
And another chapter in our book kind of dovetails off of that. It's kindergarten readiness. And I want to say that parents are the key to school readiness. I've spent the bulk of my career working with families in preparation for kindergarten and offering sessions to support the understanding of what school readiness looks like. And readiness doesn't imply that children should have mastered all the skills for formal schooling. So we think about numbers and writing their full name and knowing all the letters, and it's not necessary to know all of this information. What is important is that we're nurturing the brain so it's prepared for those learning experiences in school. So,
Hmm.
some ways to do this center on emergent literacy and also using the environment to nurture learning. And we talk about this, well, we've already hit early literacy, but I'll just remind families print awareness so crucial. So, when you're reading those books to your child, just make sure they understand how a book actually works when you open it and that you're reading from left to right. Letter knowledge is crucial, so playing around with letters. Don't feel like a child has to know all the letters before kindergarten. It's fun if they know the letters in their name because it empowers them, because the name to a child is so meaningful. Vocabulary knowledge is also a fun area because parents obviously have a higher vocabulary than the child. So when you're reading those picture books, point out some of those higher level vocabulary words that you think a child won't remember or even understand. You can explain that to them early on, and children love using big, beautiful words. Phonological awareness is also great because it gives a child opportunities to clap out words. So when you're in the car, you can say, "All right, we're going to clap out some words such as banana," and the child will clap it out, and you'll talk about how many syllables are in that word. This really promotes early reading skills as children progress into readers and looking at print. It helps them break down those words. So those fun little games you do early on really supports. Um, Comprehension, also such a huge area. Just being able to read a book as children progress is wonderful, but if they don't understand the meaning behind it, it really doesn't support the whole foundation of reading. We love reading because it tells a story, and so children have to understand the story behind the print, which leads me to emergent writing. Children also need to understand that the scribbles they make on the paper are for the intent of telling a story. So I always talk to parents about how writing progresses. So early on, their drawings or scribbles look messy, but oftentimes they represent a story. And that's the most fun when you're scribbling with your child to sit down and talk about the story with them. And so the scribbles start out as messy, like scratches, and then they progress into curly cues and then wavy scribbles, like continuously. So it looks like writing. So that's when children are really starting to get it, believe it or not. And then you're going to see letter-like formations, and you'll see some curly cue tails and certain things that appear to be letters. And then all of a sudden, you'll see strings of letters. And so all of these progressions take place as children are transitioning into writers. Once they hit kindergarten, they'll start with invented spelling, and that's when they're using the sounds in the word to actually put letters to it. And those amazing things will happen in kindergarten. So, as parents at home, I would just encourage them to make the interactions playful and don't stress if your child can only sit for 5 minutes. It's okay because they're still young and we know children need to get up and run and play. So, make your learning time together, if you're doing some learning sessions at home, short. And that's the best way for them to observe. Then use every transition period, is what I like to call, in the car or when you're walking the dog, as methods to encourage learning without a child knowing they're learning. So think about those incidental times where you can just fill your child's head with new vocabulary words. So many wonderful things. You touched upon many of the things community members can do to support early learning. So I'm not going to dig into that too much. But yeah, kindergarten readiness, so fun and so
So
important right
many good
now.
So many good points. And I would add to that too, just experiences, allowing your children to have so many different experiences,
Yeah.
social experiences where they're playing with friends or meeting new people or going to the park and interacting with other children, maybe going to museums or like little please touch museums where they can get their hands on things and play.
Mhm.
Just different things that they get to go and see and explore, going for a hike in the woods, going to the beach, feeling the sand in their toes. Like so many different experiences are going to give them more of a foundation for when they get to kindergarten and have that frame of reference and have a vocabulary of things that they've had the opportunity to see and touch and explore is going to be really helpful too, along with those social pieces where they've had to practice sharing and they've had to practice waiting their turn and they've had to practice sitting still or maybe being in their own space. So maybe your local library has a story time, or there's often so many free experiences you can take
Mhm.
advantage of, where they're going to have some opportunity to interact with other children and have
Yeah.
to practice some of those soft skills that we want to see in kindergarten, like sitting in your own space and walking in a line and waiting your turn and those sorts of things too. So thinking about maybe it's Maybe it's at church or in a toddler play gym or wherever it is where they can get those experiences. Those are so important for kindergarten readiness as well. So
And
you're
if your
probably already
child,
doing it.
right, and sometimes children aren't socially ready to engage.
Yeah. Hmm.
And sometimes they're not making progress the way other children are.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a need for concern if you see your child isn't progressing the way other children are progressing. And I love the work in our next chapter shares a little bit about what to do or
Yes.
what it looks like when children don't progress as we typically think they should.
Yes, perfect segue, Crystal. So, our next chapter, delays in early child development. So, we do talk about what that looks like when you see a delay. Eh,
Mhm.
Um, so, so here is a statistic. Actually, 1 in 6 young children do experience some sort of developmental delay. That is 18% of the entire pediatric population that have a developmental or behavioral disability or delay. In 2016, it was estimated that 52.9 million children globally under the age of 5 had some sort of developmental disability. So, what do you do when you sort of, usually as a parent, we just sort of have a gut instinct that we need to get something looked into a little further if we suspect our child could perhaps be delayed in an area. Maybe it's just speech, maybe it's motor skills, maybe it's more globally. We have that concern. Um, you definitely want to start with bringing it up to your child's healthcare provider. If they see a pediatrician or nurse practitioner, you want to bringing it up to them. Talk to them about perhaps that you need a referral to early intervention where you could have a speech therapist or an occupational therapist or a physical therapist come to your home and do an evaluation and perhaps start some intervention. But we really stress in this chapter the importance of addressing it early. Um, I think a lot of people want to take that sort of wait and see approach, but there's no harm in getting an evaluation or bringing it up to a healthcare provider and really addressing it. We're not even necessarily looking for a label or a diagnosis. We're often just when I as a therapist go into a child's home, we're just looking at that child's function. What can they do independently? What are they still struggling with? And how can we support them? So it definitely will benefit you and your child if you are definitely more on the aggressive side of, I really want to get this looked at. I want to get on a list for an evaluation or have someone come to my home. So this chapter takes you step by step how to do that. No matter what state you live in, there are resources in every state in the country, and we take you through um, how to do that and a bunch of organizations that can help and a bunch of places where you could find support in that area. We do definitely recommend keeping up with your well baby checks, that every baby should go to their healthcare provider very regularly throughout early childhood. So definitely keep up with those well baby checks. It's important to document your child's milestones so you have some sense of when they are reaching milestones, the developmental movement milestones, speech and language, cognitive, all of those things. Um, and basically, as far as the community, we want to consider that places that children will come, they will have full accessibility. That
Mhm.
includes handicap parking, ramps, places for wheelchairs to get in and out of if necessary.
Yeah.
Consider sensory needs of children. Um, I know we've talked about this before. My husband owns a movie theater. We do sensory friendly shows. We have shows where we turn the sound down a little bit. We keep the lights on a little bit, lights at a low level so that children aren't overstimulated by the very loud sounds in the theater, and we keep the lights a little bit higher and things like that that makes it easier to bring a child that might have some sensory needs in to come see a movie. So, if you have a business in your area, think about some things you can do to support families and parents that way. There's lots of things landlords can do, including ensuring that there is no lead in the paint. We talk a lot about lead, and I just want to point out For every 5 micrograms of lead found in a child's blood, their IQ drops by 1.5 points. So it is so critical that we are aware of lead in our children's environments. We go into that in detail and how we can eliminate that and who we can, resources that you can reach out to if you suspect lead. So those are some of the things that we discuss in the chapter about developmental delays.
Thank you for sharing all those helpful tips. So important for families if they're feeling at all insecure about the development of their child. In our book, we also have a chapter on play, and you probably wonder, why do we need a whole chapter on play? Play happens naturally, right? Um, but when you think back to your early years in kindergarten, as a kindergarten student, I think many of us think about the joys we found in play. However, in today's world, play is lacking, believe it or not. When you're looking in your neighborhoods, playgrounds aren't as full as they used to be. I grew up in the day when you would look at the street lights and you knew to be home at that time because you were outside constantly. Today, we're battling against so many inside things. So much TV programming, both parents being more actively working. Also, you can't go outside as much. If you're in a childcare setting, you're often inside. So we focused on the play chapter just to get people thinking about how important play is and how much it supports mental health and self-regulation in young children. In our book, we talk about types of play, stages of play, features of play. I'm not going to get into all of that because it would take me a long time. It would take me a whole show segment just to go over
Yeah.
that. We spent a lot of time on it. But we talk about play in the brain and how role playing is so fun and it gives the opportunity to incorporate imagination, fantasy, elaborate communication with peers, and this increases memory building in the brain when you're role playing because you're pulling on things that you have watched and noticed, and you're also using vocabulary from that. Play, even in adults, releases dopamine, and that's that feel good chemical that we all love and want. This feel good chemical enhances memory. It activates the prefrontal cortex, essential for that decision making. So, play is beneficial for many reasons. I want to share a study in our book. And this study took place, and I'm going to look in the book because I don't want to misinterpret this. In 1968, George Land and Beth Jarman, they conducted a research study to test creativity in children, ranging in age from 3 to 5-ish years old. They were enrolled in Head Start, these children. And what they did is they were asking them to look at a problem and come up with a new and different innovative idea. And this is the same situation, same scenario that they use within NASA when they're selecting their scientists and engineers. Super cool. But what I want you to get from this is that the percentage of children scoring at genius level in creativity, being able to come up with those innovative ideas at 5 years old, we have so much capability to be creative and think on genius level. 98% of children that took this test scored at the genius level. So this was a longitudinal study, meaning that they tracked and continued to do this as children aged. At 10 years of age, only 30% had any genius ability or creative ability. At 15 years of age, only 12% displayed this genius ability. And so, of course, as they continued to age, the same test was then later given to 280,000 adults. And within that grouping, they were all 31 years of age. Only 2% scored at the genius level. And the reason I share this is that we need play because it stimulates creativity. And this doesn't just have to be centers within the classroom. Play can happen through anything you're doing in the home. You can encourage all kinds of imaginative and creative conversations through play. If you're a classroom teacher, this can happen through direct instruction. It can happen through project-based learning. There's so many play opportunities. Today, play advocates worry about the decline and sometimes the elimination of school play. I'm seeing being out in the field, more and more play coming back around. So the pendulum is now swinging, and we are seeing a lot of play-based kindergarten settings, which is amazing because during the period of No Child Left Behind, and for those of you not in education, this was a time when all the schools focused on more testing. And this trickled down to kindergarten. And so we got rid of our precious kindergarten play sets, our kitchens, and literally we were sitting little kids in rows and having them take tests in kindergarten. So some of this still remains, but this is starting to move out and we're starting to make way for play. So
Hmm.
any I just encourage parents and family members to incorporate play as frequently as possible. And community members, thank you for the amazing playgrounds that you put in our neighborhoods, in town centers. And I hope you continue to do that because there are so many cool playgrounds out there today that have all kinds of opportunities for creativity, not just the standard seesaws and things that I grew up on, which I made my own creative outlet through, but there's so many more cool things. So that brings us to screen time.
Yes.
And I want to segue to screen time because screen time is taking away from play. So much so, I feel like I'm living in the era of the Jetsons. You know, with this day and age of Amazon,
It's true.
everything is convenient, and
Yes.
everything is convenient in a kid's world. They're getting those dopamine hits off of the games that they're playing, and who wouldn't want to keep getting that lovely
Yep.
dopamine refresh through the gaming? I don't need play anymore, right? Because I'm getting it from my device.
So true.
Yeah. So there is a whole chapter on screen time. I do want to point out some screen time is okay, but we saw a huge increase in screen time after the COVID-19 pandemic because many of us took to our computers. It's just what we had to do because we were scared and we wanted to be doing something.
Mhm.
There are forming categories of screen time. So I just want to review that. Passive screen time is when you're just aimlessly trying to get to the next level. In my day and age, that was Atari, and I definitely tried to get to all the levels of Frogger, Pitfall, Pac-Man, you name it. So many children are still doing that today. Then there's interactive. So this gets a little better because there's a little bit of problem solving. So more things, more thinking, more activation of the prefrontal cortex, communication with devices, and that's video chatting, much like we do through Zoom. And then content creation, which is not bad because there are some great things you can do on a screen where children are able to make digital art, music, coding. Um, I do want to point out a study, and this is just a warning study, and it was done in Japan. And it really centers around the prefrontal cortex, all that great thinking. And that the prefrontal cortex is necessary because it helps us with problem solving and planning and decision making. And in Japan, they did a study that they unearthed using a tablet can affect problem solving tasks. So they found that 1 year olds who were exposed to screens for more than 1 hour a day had more developmental delays than those who experienced screen-free playtime. And this study was done in 2023, so pretty fresh. Delays were observed at age 2 and 4 years of age in communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and social skills. They also found that mothers of children with high levels of screen time were often younger and sometimes impacted by postpartum depression. So, all the more reasons we need to support our families, going back to our earlier chapters. We have lots of studies that we mention that pinpoint why we shouldn't be on our screens as much and why we should be playing. So I'm not going to go over those. If you want to learn more, dig into our book. And as far as tips for parents, we have a whole section called the Rush Hour playlist. And it's it's those times when we're like panicked and we don't know what to do. we want to play with our kids, but we only have like this much time, which is so many parents. So we give opportunities for babies and up to 12 months. We have a whole section about what to do when you're wearing your baby, some things you can do to stimulate the brain, the importance of tummy time and those gym exercises on the floor. So lots of things to do instead of screen time. And then we break it down between 1 and 3 years. And we talk about how when mom's doing laundry, how this is a great time to sort socks into colors or matches. So, so many learning opportunities. Cooking in the kitchen builds so much. And then we break it into preschool age, 3 to 5, and things to do in the car, such as I Spy. So, lots of suggestions in that chapter to um, to take us away from screens.
Yes, we try to give tons of tips because we
Yeah,
there's a lot of data out there, but I really hate when I see don't do this, don't be on your screen, don't let your child have a screen. But okay, what are
yeah.
the alternatives? Like parents are busy, we're stressed, like give us some ideas. So we really tried to do that in the book. We tried to offer some suggestions. And the one thing I want to add to everything Crystal said about toys, screens, is think about electronic toys too. When we're talking about younger children, because electronic toys that talk to the child and play music and light up and all that, I think
Mhm,
parents often think those are great because they're teaching children like a foundation for technology, and we want children to be able to use technology when they're school age. But it's actually the opposite because children learn through interactions with other human beings. And if we're taking the place of those human interactions with the toy talking to the child,
mhm.
we've just lost so much capacity for new learning and attachment. So that's really
That's true.
why, we encourage those old school toys, the
Mhm.
blocks and the balls and the things, the puzzles and that
Yeah.
sort of stuff that's going to encourage hands-on and encourage the parent to be involved versus, well, the toy's talking to the child, so I
Yeah.
don't feel the need to interact. So we really try to discourage those types of toys as much as possible too, along with the screens. And when you're talking about play, I just thought of a story. My my husband and I were at a grocery store and it was like off time. There weren't a lot of people shopping. So there were like five teenage people that worked there kind of standing around. And the bagger put our 2 dozen eggs in a bag and then promptly dropped the entire bag and broke all the eggs, which everyone kind of laughed about. Oops, broke the eggs. But all of the teenagers that worked there kind of stood around and looked at each other and nobody knew what to do. And my husband had to say, could someone go get us more eggs? And I just thought to myself,
Oh.
were these children that never played and did not develop any problem-solving skills? Because it
Mhm.
was just so funny how they had no idea what do we do now that this just happened. And
Great
you can
point.
just watch children play and work through problems in their play and
Mhm.
learn those skills that are really life skills that are going to aid them, into adulthood. And I think that is such a critical piece of play that we often overlook. And as an occupational therapist, we call play the work of childhood. It is their occupation, and that is how they are learning growth and development and social skills and problem-solving skills and, fostering that curiosity. So,
Yeah.
yeah, as you said, we could talk all day long about
Oh,
play,
yeah.
but
Right.
yeah, just some key points we wanted to make that we did, really expand upon in our book. So please do check out our book if you're interested in more of this information. It is called The Early Childhood Promise by Aimee Ketchum and Crystal Luce, and it is available on Amazon. And if you do buy it on Amazon and check it out, please leave us a review. We love to hear your thoughts. You could also go to earlychildhood.com where you could learn more about our book there. You could leave reviews there. If you have questions for us directly, you could reach out through the earlychildhoodpromise.com,
Good. Okay.
earlychildhoodpromise.com. And we'll put that in our show notes. But yeah, we'll put links to our book on Amazon in our show note as well. for today. And I want to give a shout out. I keep forgetting to do this. My husband is the producer of our podcast, and I want to thank him for helping us do our editing and producing and getting our podcast up every week. He has a podcast called the Penn Cinema Podcast, and he's on his 327th episode. So he's much more experienced than we are. Does his podcast with David, and they talk about all things movies. So if you're a movie
Mm,
buff, you might want to check that out as well.
right
And
on.
yeah, we're over here talking about all things early childhood. So having
Thank you, Penn.
so much
I
fun.
love it.
Yes.
The only reason we have this podcast because
Yes.
we wouldn't be ready for that. And thank you to our listeners. And we hope you will continue to plant the seeds of learning.